Good morning, sir. Adrian Walt, pleased to meet you, sir.
Right, low, up. Right, march, regular salute. Relay, arms. Right, ho! Arms! Right, hold up! Arms!
Ladies and gentlemen, the Governor is now being asked to inspect the guard. And please be seated. Thank you, sir.
Right, right hand on! Eight!
Can I start by acknowledging Mr. Matt Williams, Federal Member for Hindmarsh, Dr. Campbell and His Worship the Mayor of the City of Holdfast today, and I saw a number of other elected members here, including my friend the Mayor of Marines, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Fred, Reverend Dr. Peter Ryan, members of the Re-enact SA, ladies and gentlemen. I'm greatly honoured to be here today for this commemoration march and ceremony. Remembrance of our military history is something that I am passionate about. Both my wife, Lan, and I come from military families and are all too aware of the sacrifices that are made in the interest of serving the nation. In fact, one of my very first engagements following my swearing in as Governor 2 weeks ago was to lay a wreath in private ceremonies at each of the South Australian National War Memorial and the Vietnam War Memorial. As Lan and I came from a country of wartime chaos and instability, we have a deep appreciation of democracy, peace, and the freedom that exists in our society. Importantly, I'm most mindful that the life that we all enjoy here today is in large part due to the contribution and sacrifice of those who travel thousands and thousands of miles away to respond to the call of our nation.
Here.
Following the British declaration of war on Germany on the 4th of August 1914, word spread like a bushfire throughout the nation that Australia would offer Britain 20,000 troops, with recruits flooding in from all over the country and many more volunteers than places available. This first contingent of the newly formed Australian Imperial Force were later described as, and I quote, physically the finest their country could offer and masters of everything that they had encountered, unquote. In South Australia, a camp was hastily established at Moffatteville and the first recruits were signed up on the 19th of August. That afternoon, they were granted leave as the camp leaders realized that given the unexpected numbers, there was no way they can feed them all. The vast majority of men who served Australia in the Great War were not professional soldiers, but civilians in uniform. These men were clerks and accountants, bricklayers, grocers, doctors, bushmen, librarians, farriers, and blacksmiths, among many other occupations. And they came from all our state, such as Murray Bridge, Port Pirie, Renmark, York Peninsula, and all across the Adelaide Plains. Volunteers from Broken Hill were also trained at Moffatteville and served as South Australian units at Leeds, many men born in Great Britain. Excitement was also high in the broader community. Patriotic public gathering attracted huge crowds, and his historical record tells us that the slightest reference to the King or the French or the Belgians produced tumultuous applause. The soldiers were warmly welcomed by the local community. A mere month after the first recruits arrived at Moffatteville, they had been trained and equipped to the point where they could be presented to the public of South Australia. 2,193 men with 725 horses marched from camp to Adelaide, where offices had been closed, hotels draped in bunting, and streets crowded with onlookers. This was the event that inspired today's march and ceremony. Newspaper at the time reported, and I quote, "First there was a sound of cheering, louder as well as does the sound of the surf on the stone-swept beach. Never in the history of the state has greater significance attached to the appearance of soldiery than to the yesterday's march of South Australia's contribution to the first Imperial Expeditionary Force. feature of this parade was South Australia's newly formed 10th Battalion, whose descendants, 10 of the 27th Regiment, still serve our nation today. Then the Governor, Sir Henry Galway, took the salute, and I was so proud and greatly honoured to do the same for the purposes of this commemoration. A month later, on 20th of October, the troops boarded trains at Moffatville Railway Station. Along the route to Outer Harbour, the train was continuously cheered as the soldiers passed houses, shops, offices and factories. Governor Galway addressed the troops before they departed, and then the ships pulled away from the wharf. More than half of those who trained at Moffatville in 1914 would land at Gallipoli before dawn the following April. Ultimately, nearly 35,000 South Australians would enlist to serve in this war. 7,000 of them would not return. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. Thank you, sir, for those words. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Dr. King Rollond, the Mayor of Holdfast Bay. Thank you.
We acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional owners of this land. I extend a very warm welcome to Your Excellency, Governor Hieu and the Federal Member for Hindmarsh, Matt Williams, Brigadier Frewen, Professor Robin Pryor, Chaplain Peter Ryan, Superintendent Reinitz, the Mayors of Marion, Felicity Lewis and Charles Sturt, Kirsten Alexander, the CEO of Holdfast Bay, Justin Lynch, and councillors. To everyone else here today taking part in this ceremony, and to those that are witnessing this remarkable reenactment, welcome to Mosley Square, Glenelg on this beautiful spring day. One can only imagine what it was like 100 years ago. The world is a very dangerous place in which to live, not because of those who are evil, but because of good people who do nothing about it. Those words were spoken by Albert Einstein, a German scientist, born in 1879. However, in 1914, when Germany declared war on Poland and eventually Europe, the good people of South Australia did stand up and answer the call. In 1914, both my parents were very young teenagers, but men and women as young as 18 and 19 offered to serve our country and enlisted in the armed forces. To them, freedom and democracy was under threat. Their training was brief, and I'm sure most had no idea what was before them. For those who have been watching ANZAC nurses on the ABC, the heartache, the depression and anxiety, the extreme trauma and primitive treatments have shocked most of us. These were young men and women with their whole lives before them being ruined by senseless war. Our present society owes a lot to them. The final episode of ANZAC Nurses is on tonight at 8:30. I wish to make particular mention of those people who have played a major part in this commemoration of an event 100 years ago, soldiers marching from Morpheville training camp to Glenelg before their departure. James Hurst and David Lee had the vision, the determination and the persistence. Peter Summers provided additional help, and Matt Williams with the federal grant as well, and Anne Thwaites with her assistance here today. The police escort for the march, the Light Horse Brigade, the veteran cars and the various military battalions, especially those who travelled from interstate, and also the Holdfast Bay events team. Finally, I wish to thank His Excellency, Mr. Hieu for his attendance, just 14 days after being sworn in as Governor of South Australia. He, more than anyone else, has experienced the ravages of war firsthand, escaped the tyranny in a leaking boat, enduring a perilous journey to reach the shores of Australia, and has made the most incredible achievements since his arrival. I'm sure he won't mind me repeating a phrase he's often used. Good day, mate. Welcome to Australia. Your Excellency, I'm proud to say we are all your mate. In fact, those men and women who fought for our freedom were also our mates. We will remember them.
Federal Member for Hindmarsh, on behalf of the Federal Government and our Prime Minister, Tony Abbott.
His Excellency, the Governor, Hieu, Mayors, Rollond, Kirsten Alexander from City of Charles Sturt, and Lucianne Lewis from Marion, members of the Australian Defence Forces, and also, importantly, members of Re-enact SA who have brought this event together. Ladies and gentlemen, like Mayor Rollond said, we have a great place here in Glenelg. As the member of Hindmarsh, it's a great facility that we can host special events such as this. And I have great privilege in reading a message from the Prime Minister, the Honourable Tony Abbott. I'm pleased to provide this message for the commemoration marking the raising of the first contingent of the Australian Imperial Force in South Australia. The First World War was the crucible that forged our nation. The story of the Australians who served in the First World War is one of great triumph and tragedy. We must remember those men of the Australian Imperial Force who marched through Adelaide to people's cheers. They left home to fight Gallipoli on the Western Front and the Middle East. The First World War impacted on Australia like nothing else. From a population of under 5 million, more than 400,000 enlisted, more than 300,000 served overseas, and more than 60,000 never came back. Of the 270,000 who returned, more than half had been wounded and others had mental scars that will never be healed. As we begin to commemorate the centenary of ANZAC, we honour all those who have been prepared to put their lives in the line for our country. Their character, exemplified by courage, mateship and sacrifice, has provided an ongoing example of what it means to be Australian. I join with you in honouring the men of the first Australian contingent of the Australian Imperial Force, Tony Abbott, Prime Minister of Australia in September 2014. I also have a message from the Senator, the Honourable Michael Robinson, who is the Minister for Veterans Affairs. He is also the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for the centenary of ANZAC. 100 years ago in Australia, August 4, 1914, our involvement in the First World War was declared. In the months following, fathers, brothers and sons responded to the nation's call to serve the Australian Imperial Force. Many women also signed up to serve as nurses. During the centenary of ANZAC, we mark a century of service and sacrifice, and encompassing all wars, conflicts and peacekeeping organisations in which Australians have been involved. The centenary will be the most significant period of commemoration in our nation's history. I commend the event organisers, the membership of Re-enact SA, for their initiative in bringing together today's fantastic activities. I was pleased to announce the funding for this event to the Australian Government's ANZAC Centenary Local Grants Program for $35,000. Creating activities that showcase the experience of the community is an important part in telling the stories of Australia during wartime. From the soldiers' journey to reach the front line, to the families and communities that were left behind. It is through initiatives like this that we can ensure that history and legacy is not lost on future generations of Australians. Thank you from the Senator, the Honourable Michael Robinson.
Lieutenant Colonel Jack Gregg. He's here because Brigadier John Frewen is doing physical training with the Prime Minister this morning in Darwin. So John wanted to be here, but he asked Lieutenant Colonel Jack Gregg to please speak on his behalf. Thank you, sir.
Your Excellency, Your Worship, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. I had a speech prepared, but if I'm any judge of soldiers and guards, I think I can read your mind at the moment. Politicians, senior officers, discussions, let's go and have a cup of tea or a proceedings here. So I'll be brief. But I would like to congratulate you all on a fantastic outturn this afternoon, and the organisers for this event. Many of these events worldwide now will be re-enacted over the coming 4 to 5 years. Many aspects of the First World War, such as the Battle of the Somme, the German Spring Offensive, landings at Gallipoli, and on, these commemoration activities will take part. It's important for us to recognise and acknowledge that other events of the war affected communities, friends and families of the soldiers. And this event provides a great opportunity to acknowledge the commitment of the local South Australians who form the Volunteer 10th Battalion, and the overwhelming dedication of the people of South Australia to support their loved ones in their decision to join the war effort. I'm proud to share with you that my own grandfather, Private Creek, served with that battalion, 10th Battalion, and he would have been here on this spot 100 years ago. All the Australians who served at that time were part of the Australian Imperial Force, the 10th Battalion. And I represent the 1st Brigade this afternoon as part of that same 1st Australian Division. There's a big element of that brigade here now in South Australia, the 7th Battalion, the Royal South Australian Regiment, and a number of other supporting elements. Much has changed about this 1st Division over the 100 years. Different equipment, different training, different capabilities, but aspects of the division are enduring. Courage, sacrifice, mateship, discipline and pride. These are all constants, and it's placed the Australian Army as one of the most professional, capable and respected in the world for over a century now. It is interesting to reflect that the soldiers who joined the Australian Imperial Force and stood where you are standing 100 years ago and were inspected by the governor were probably excited and keen to get stuck into the fight to protect the motherland. There was a good chance, they all thought at the time, that they'd even be home perhaps before Christmas. They had little knowledge of where Gallipoli, Turkey, France or even Belgium were in the world, and names such as Villers-Bretonneux, Neck, Lonevine, Fromelles, the Windmill and the Somme weren't Australian names and weren't talked about in Australian film. But even less insight to the German Huns, massed artillery, machine gun fire and gas warfare. They had no way of knowing that they were about to enter hell, and many of them would not return to their loved ones in Australia, but would perish in some foreign paddock, some muddy trench, or some blood-soaked beach. Those that did return, many were broken physically and spiritually, and never returned. I congratulate you again. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure now to introduce you the next speaker, and he is Professor Robin Pryor, who's just been appointed to the university, Flinders University, in the History Department. Professor Pryor has had a long association with the Australian Defence Force, some 20 years, at the Australian Defence Force Academy, lecturing in history, military history. He is also a world-renowned expert and a leading authority on national and international warfare. His recent works on Gallipoli, World War I and its effects on society are quite noteworthy. Thank you, Professor.
Your Excellency, Members of Parliament, Mayors, distinguished guests. I usually get 45 minutes to lecture. I've got 7 minutes this morning, so I'm going to get right into it. There's a lot said about the origins of the war over recent years. Not much is said about why people fought. And when we think about South Australia, what sort of society was it that produced these 35,000 men who enlisted? What was it in that society society that allowed so many to think of this as their cause. South Australia was a progressive social democracy in 1914. Listen to these South Australian firsts. 1839, first to form a Chamber of Commerce. 1869, first to form a Chamber of Manufacturing. 1876, the first state to recognise trade unions. In politics, our government has run as the world's first for South Australia. And just after the war, we had the first woman to serve in local government. She served at Rice. We were the first capital in Australia connected to London by telephone. We started the first state secretary.
Aggression, expansionism. What we fought for was to maintain the way of life that's been established in this place from 1836. A democratic way of life, a free society, a progressive society, one that wants to see the state move onwards and upwards in all manner of social democratic ways. How appropriate that we fight against the things that leave us today with the kind of life we have, aggression and militarism. How appropriate it was that this society support other liberal societies in fighting and standing against aggression. I'm thinking in particular of the British Liberal Society, and it's worth mentioning that 1/3 of the first AIF were born in England. And it's not surprising that most people thought of England in those days as home. For a lot of them, it was home. So we raised 4 battalions of our own, 10th, 27th, 43rd and the 50th, and we participated with the other small states in the small states battalions, the 12th, the 48th, the 52nd and the 32nd. The 10th probably deserves a first mention. It was the first to land at Gallipoli, and an honour which remains with us today. The other battalions, I'm thinking especially
The battalion, game to the last, the sister of the 10th Battalion, which fought at Gallipoli and then later on the Western Front. They sustained horrendous casualties. Mr. James Hurst, historian for the Re-enact SA. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Andrew. Firstly, I'd like to thank every single one of you for being here today. From the start, we were hoping to make this a community event, as it was in 1914, and as our communities who have to send their sons, daughters, husbands and brothers to serve their country in time.